That's why they're private things for most people. We don't trust people. You know, we don't go.
And it's appropriate sometimes.
And it's appropriate. But now, so if the trust below us, between us, is low, the revelation, and likewise, you're less likely to share an observation about the other to help reveal to them something you know about them, particularly if it's a little bit challenging, not critical, but just challenging, or you think they might find it challenging. If you don't have high trust, that's a very dangerous place to go. You will feel, I won't feel safe, and they mightn't feel safe in that. So the trust is important, not so much in the self-discovery or the observation, but it's important in the revelation, the sharing of it between us. So you can do a certain amount of the work yourself.
Yeah.
And of course, the way to build trust is to be vulnerable. Now, I don't mean vulnerable to the point of being, putting yourself in danger, emotional danger, or vulnerable danger. But if I'm more revealing of myself, then it's an invitation for the other to trust me, right? You trust people. How do you build trust? Basically by knowing people intimately, and seeing their behaviour respond to that. So you can help build the trust, but trust is important.
Our next little bit that we're going to talk about is a practical tool for doing that. So we might go on to that. Isabella, if you just put the slide up for us. So the daily strongest emotion, those who have done some of our programs will be familiar with this, and it's simply a daily sharing of your most significant emotion. So the first step is to identify the emotion, and I suppose obviously it's a connection ritual. Doing daily, it's great, and it meets that daily strongest essential ritual if it is done daily. But the first step is to identify the emotion. Now, it might be the strongest emotion you've had that day, particularly if you've had some intense reactions to things. It might be that, or it might just be something that was a little bit unusual or unexpected. For example, something might happen and you had and you felt a kind of, for example, my work colleagues, or in my case, I heard that my brother and sister had lunch, and usually my reaction is, oh, they didn't invite me, and I feel a little bit jealous and left out. But last week I'd heard that they'd had lunch, and I was like, hey, that didn't hurt this time. There's something that's shifted and changed in me. So that might be something I'd say, well, that was a significant thing that happened, is that I had this unexpected kind of emotion. So once you identify the emotion, whatever it is, the next step then is to sit with it. And I love the I wonder questions. I wonder what it's about, and to just kind of go a little bit.
So when you have a strong feeling, so your strongest feeling, your strongest emotion day is self-revealing about something. You had an emotional response to something. So why? Why did you react? Not what happened. We know what happened, but why was it the most significant emotional, the strongest feeling you had in that whole day? Why?
Yeah.
That's self-revealing to discover that, because it could be a trivial little thing, a word somebody said, or it might be something profound about just how you are in your work or in your family life, and it was just another grindy day. But why was that the strongest emotion I had today? Why was that the strongest feeling that really jumped up at me? Or when I thought about it, I really sort of sensed that feeling that I hadn't even been conscious of, but now that I've thought about it, what's going on behind it?
And that's part of pushing into that unknown or blind area, is that self-reflection. So often our first emotional awareness is a more superficial emotion, and if we reflect on it more deeply, there's a deeper emotion in it. So typical emotions that can have other layers to them are things like angry, sad, happy, or afraid. They're kind of the more simplistic emotions. But when you actually go deeper in those, you'll often find that there's something else. The other thing about it is that our emotional reactions are driven by our needs. So if there's an interior need, an emotional need that's not being met, we will have a sort of an unpleasant kind of emotional reaction. Whereas if a need is being met and fulfilled, we tend to have positive emotions. But it's hard to kind of go, what are my needs? They're not sort of really readily in our consciousness. So our emotions are, if you like, that window onto what's happening at that deeper level of our needs. And so when we just take that little bit of a pause to go deeper, we can often surface some of that really rich insight about ourselves and the needs that we might not even realise that we have.
Now, you don't have to sit in Eucharistic adoration for an hour with a notepad to work your way through this. No. You can just be driving home from work, and you can just stop as you're driving home. You think, rather than just listening to the radio or making the 25 calls that you need to make, you take a couple of minutes.
That tells you something about his life, doesn't it?
And you can take a couple of minutes and you can say to myself, just look back in your day, what was my strongest feeling today? What was my strongest emotion? What did I notice about today? And you think, you know what, I had a real bright spot when I had that walk out of that conversation with X. Well, why was that? What was it about that conversation? Well, actually, I felt affirmed, or I felt we'd made a breakthrough together, or it was just a great to see success after lots of work on something that we'd been working on together. So now you've got a little bit, and then you can go a little bit deeper, and you say, why is that so significant in my life at the moment? And why is that registering? And so you can keep going down a bit, or you can just stop at that level. And now you've got something to talk about that evening. How was your day, honey? Oh, it was okay. Well, actually, I was just reflecting on it, and I had a really positive moment today. Or I came out today really tired, and the reason why I think I was feeling so tired was X. You've got something to share. So go back to the Johari window. I've gone down. I've reduced my own blindness, and now I've got a mechanism to reveal to Francine, and some of the unknown has disappeared out of that window. So this little daily ritual where we just stop and think about our emotional journey in the day, ask what it tells us about ourselves, and then be prepared to share it with each other in whatever way we find. And this is where the ritual comes in, is to find the time and the mechanism to make it happen.
So I guess just to tie up all this part one, where we're talking about repair, how does it stack up against the things we've been talking about? Well, firstly, it's obviously a connection ritual. It's something that we do. We do it every day. It hits the mark as a daily essential ritual, builds connection. Self-discovery and self-disclosure. That's obviously happening as well, because we're reflecting internally of what's going on for us in that I wonder question, and then we're sharing it with each other. And finally, expectations. What it's doing is that it's a process that helps us to own our emotions. I think one of the strongest things, or the biggest mistakes we make in terms of our expectations, is we project responsibility for our emotional reactions onto our spouse. So he makes me mad when he does that, or he really irritates me when he does this.
This is theoretical, by the way. It never happens.
Or when he does that, it makes me really happy. Our emotions are actually our own. And when we reflect on what's going on in that, so when Byron does something that annoys me, I need to kind of own that. I'll give you a little example of a journey.
I've never annoyed you. It's not possible.
I'm telling you the espresso cup story.
Oh, God. Keep going.
So a couple of years ago, we got a new espresso machine, and it came with a couple of free espresso cups. And at the time, nobody in our family was drinking espresso. We were all having lattes and cappuccinos, but I put the espresso cups in the cupboard for guests, thinking that would be useful to have with guests.
We never bought them out, by the way. But
About a year later, we had some guests over and they wanted an espresso. So I'm hunting for these espresso cups, can't find them anywhere. I'm turning the kitchen upside down, really distracted. And Byron's going, what are you looking for? I'm saying, I can't find the espresso cups. To which he says,
I threw them out. We didn't use them. I mean, they were free. They were crappy little espresso cups.
They were espresso cups, though. But they actually were the right size for the type of coffee we're going to serve. It just triggered me like you wouldn't believe. I could not let it go. We had guests there. I'm trying to rein in these incredibly intense, surging emotions and behave, being gracious guest, a gracious host to our guests.
She did it pretty well for about 2 hours.
But it wasn't until afterwards, and I actually stepped out and did a bit of that wandering and reflected on what was going on, took it to prayer actually. And what really emerged from my reflection was that he was triggering a deep childhood wound. My dad, bless his heart, love him to bits, and we have a beautiful relationship, but he's very much Mr. Anti-clutter. And he was constantly, as I was growing up, he would be cleaning up and throwing stuff out. And it hurt me and wounded me deeply that he would throw out things that I found precious because he thought they were junk. And so it's instilled in me a bit of a hoarder's syndrome. I have a lot of emotional difficulty throwing things away. I'm not going to show you what's on the floor of the office here because it's we put it below camera level, but it's full of things that
not a clinical hoarder.
We don't actually have a use for, but I hate to throw them away. So owning that helped me to release Byron from the responsibility. He, obviously was doing something completely reasonable, but I was having a very intense, unreasonable reaction to it.
So the point of that is that you need to own your feelings. They're your feelings. They're immoral. They don't come with any moral
They're not immoral, they're just amoral.
Amoral, sorry, they're amoral. They don't come with any moral pluses or minuses. They're just your feelings. They are a reaction to a situation. You know, that's what they come, but they tell you something about yourself, and they give you an insight. So if you set yourself in a situation when you can be reflective on your life, and you can set a routine up where you can share it. So we often do this when our walk, and we don't sort of say, oh, it's 2 minutes into our walk and now we have to do. The walk has become a chance just to talk about the day a little bit, but because we've been reflective into it. But other times you can do it. We often used to do it before we went to bed at night. We just to say, what was your strongest feeling today? So just as we were sort of going through the routine of getting ready for bed, we'd be chatting about that. And what we did every day, and this is the point of a powerful, simple, powerful ritual, is we more often than not each day shared the most significant thing that happened in our day emotionally. And it didn't take hours, and it didn't require notebooks. It was just something that we got into a habit of sharing. It became a bit of a ritual. The way we expressed the ritual changed, but the fact that we were doing that became baked into our life. And so these are ways to build resilience, because that surface area is rapidly being broken down day after day after day. And that's an example of the walk. And you can do that by yourself. The spouse doesn't have to do it. Yeah. You can just share a little bit of your day, one of your feelings, etc. And the good thing about it, remember Francine had said, have a start and a finish.
And I'm just laughing, Deborah and Tim, to say they threw out unused espresso cups yesterday. Oops.
You're in trouble. I don't know who threw them out, but actually it was a mutual decision. It was actually good. Do as I say, not as I do. But so find your version of these things. And this one we don't offer this up as just one of thousands you could do. The feedback we've had over 30 years from working with married couples is this one really bears fruit. Mm-hmm. It's simple to do. And my only advice, particularly to our wives, is have a start and a finish on it, because most wives, most women have a deep hunger from their husbands to learn about their intimate. They have that intimate conversation, and the men we're terrible at it. So you will.
But it's also terrifying for them to think they might get sucked into 3 hours of conversation. So one of the tips is that put a time frame, 10-15 minutes at max. 2 minutes.
No, but in other words, have a finishing end to it, and that's why the walk's been so good for us.
Yeah, because we get home
and then it's chaos again, and so we're back into life. So we know that that's our time. And from my point of view, it's not something that if I go into this, I might never get out of it alive, or at least in the next 3 weeks.
So I think that's the end of the prepare part. We want to start looking at the repair part. Any other, Laura, I'm just checking the questions there. It's a bit hard for me to read from back here. Happy for us to move on?
Yes, Fran and Byron, that was really good. Happy for you guys to move on to the repair section. There's no other questions. So
good. Okay. So what we've talked about.
Thanks for your feedback, everybody. It's great.
Is how do you build resilience when you're just in the normal routine, right? And that's a bit like I mentioned earlier about the savings. Mm-hmm. Your savings, you're building a balance, a bank balance, a balance sheet, a goodwill between you, knowledge of each other, etc. Okay, but then what happens when you go clunk? And you go clunk every day at some level. You go clunk periodically, quite materially, and sometimes you can have a head-on, full-on collision, and the airbags are blowing, and there's bodies in the street. So what happened?
How do you taking the metaphor a bit too far there?
But how do you repair when the inevitable hurts occur? That's this topic.
Yeah. Yes. So we want to introduce you to what we call the way of mercy. And it's kind of really simple. We actually developed this for the Year of Mercy as a simple framework. We put it out into schools actually. For our Catholic schools, we have a diary that we used to produce. And so it was the idea is, can we get 4 simple steps to help students really get a practical way of repairing relationships when they've offended each other? And it's based on the restorative justice practices. So it goes in these 4 simple steps. So the first one is sorrow. And it's simply a statement, I am sorry for, state what you did, said or failed to do. So that's kind of the first step.
Say it slowly, don't you? Say it again slowly.
So I'm sorry for, and then state what you said, did or failed to do. Right. And this step is really about owning our mistakes so that we can learn from them. So I just need to check my notes here. And because we know this can be hard, especially if our error was unintentional. And this is, I guess, one of the things that over the years we've learned, that being able to take ownership for having hurt the other, even when we didn't intend it to be that way, has been a really important part of growing in maturity. And I think that's something that possibly, I'm venturing to say that men sometimes have a little bit of a harder time doing that than women do. I think women are often very quick to jump in with an apology, whereas it's maybe not so readily the case for men. Do you want to
Not sure.
challenge
That might
that?
just be us.
Might just be us. Could just be us.
I never.
You just put in your comments if you agree with that or not.
Come on, keep moving.
But I think it's also, the thing is that if we don't own our mistakes, it erodes our spouse's sense of trust and confidence in our love. That's a kind of a really important part. So going back to the earlier question about building trust, I just want to say a few words at this point around guilt. And there's a real, and the difference between guilt and shame, if you like. There's a real positive value of guilt, but it's different to shame. Shame is an emotion that's associated with beliefs about our personal value, whereas guilt is an emotion that relates to our actions or inactions or things that we do or say. Shame is about, the sort of the summary statement is shame says I am bad, whereas guilt says I did a bad thing. And that shame is obviously can be really toxic, and it goes totally counter to the Christian message. As children of God, we are His beloved sons and daughters, and and loved unconditionally more than we can ever imagine. And so part of, I think, the value of guilt is that it helps us recognise that we're living or making choices that are diminishing our capacity to really receive God's love. And so there's a positive value to guilt, and that is a pull of our conscience, in some ways calling us to change our life and change our choices so that we can more closely align with what God calls us to. And it really is actually a great value statement about our worth, in that nothing that we can do or fail to do can change God's love for us. There's nothing we can do that is so bad that God would stop loving us. But it can certainly make us feel guilty because we've breached, we've removed ourselves from the experience of His love.
And so the trick is not to be trapped by a sense of lack of self-worth, because when we're in that state, it's almost too confronting to actually be able to say, I did something to hurt you, I did something wrong, particularly if you didn't mean to do it. So you have to sort of leave that sense behind. The fact that we hurt each other happens every day at some level, and it happens sometimes in our lives at quite material levels. And there's no, I mean, I can honestly say this, I never intended to hurt Francine at any point in my life, but I've hurt her every day at some level, and some days I've hurt her gravely. So it's not about the intent, it's the fact we just did it. And it's something that as you say, is it something I said? Is it something I didn't say? Is it something I did? Is it something I didn't do? Just help me know. But you hurt somebody by not meeting their needs, by not meeting. So if Francine needs me to be present to her and I'm not, I mightn't have known she needed me to be more present tonight than before, but I wasn't there for her. Did I do something wrong in that moment? Well, no and yes. If I said a harsh word to her and was critical of her, it's clearer. But sometimes it's our absence that hurts. The capacity to say I've done something wrong, though, is a great personal strength, right? We all admire people who can look you in the eye and say, look, I'm really sorry about that. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I did.
And we can't learn from our mistakes unless we're prepared to admit we made a mistake, I think is a big point.
So the first thing is to have that sense of sorrow, to recognise that we've done something that's been harmful to the other, and own it. And if you're a loving spouse or just a normal human person, you will always feel sorry for doing that. So to own that and have sorrow for it.
So first step is sorrow, and the second step is empathy. Can you just leave that here, please? Thank you. So empathy is the step that just says it was wrong because, and then we say how it harmed the other person. And so that really involves fleshing it out and giving more detail to the pain that we've caused the other. And this is where our, firstly, it forces us to go in and understand the other's pain. It's actually quite a simple thing. When we see we've upset the other person, it's quite simple to say, hey, I'm sorry, without ever really connecting with the harm that we've caused. And so an important part of the process of mercy, this way of mercy, is to slow it down a little bit and do this empathy step, because then we actually go into and understand the harm that we've caused. Secondly, it validates the experience of the other person.
But like the coffee cups, right? So I had no sense that I thought I was just doing something useful and cleaning a cupboard out. But when I understood the way it triggered Francine, that it hurt her. I mean, because we were clearing the house out every day. Francine's throwing things out, I'm throwing them. We've got our houses, we've got 5 kids. There's stuff going out in the bins every day. So we're making independent decisions. But when we've done something that hurts the other, then we can say to them, look, I didn't realise, I'm sorry about that. That wasn't my intention. And so you can own it. Because we hurt somebody doesn't mean we meant to. But when we recognise, the important thing is when we recognise what we've done, how do we respond to it? Right, and so and likewise, we can then look at ourselves and say, well, why was that so important to me? I never, I never told Francine that was important to me. I never revealed that was an important thing. It was just something I had on my shelf, right? And so she didn't recognise it, partly because I didn't reveal it to her. So we've all got some ownership of the problem.
So, and I guess the other point is just that this daily strongest emotion trains us in empathy and helps us to tune into the emotional life of the other. So if we've got a practice of doing the daily strongest emotion as a regular part of our life, when it comes to this step in the way of mercy, it just comes more naturally and easily. The third step is the promise stage, and that is where we basically say, in the future, I will, and then we make a commitment to do it differently. So this is all about avoiding the repeat of the offence. There's nothing worse than being on the receiving end of an apology when you know that it's just going to happen over and over again because there's no intention to change or to address the things that have been hurting you. So making the promise to change indicates our sincerity to our beloved, and so that's a really important third step. Is say sorry, empathy, and then make the promise is the third step. Now, the thing about the promise is that it needs to be realistic. So an alcoholic that says, I'm never going to drink again, is obviously not being realistic. That's not going to happen. An alcoholic clearly needs to have a more supported and constructive program. So he might be, or she might be able to say, I will go and see someone about it this week and I'm making the appointment right now. That's a promise that they can follow through on. So we need to make sure that the promise that we make is actually something that is realistic. Otherwise, our spouse will not feel at all confident that we're able to do it.
And we won't be able to deliver on it.
Yeah.
So it's grand gestures, even if we intend to do them that are unrealistic, actually aren't helpful. Yeah. And sometimes the gesture mightn't be grand enough for the other, but if it's sincere from ours, go back to that story Francine told at the beginning about that husband who just unrelentingly just tried to respond. Those first responses weren't enough, but they were his best response in the circumstances. So I think it needs to be realistic and something practical that fits around our lifestyle, who we are, the way our family's working,
our individual capacity and so on. And the fourth and final step is the mercy step. So in this, the statement is, please forgive me. And I guess the thing is that it takes real humility to ask for forgiveness. Saying sorry versus asking forgiveness, we just want to unpack this a little bit. When I say I'm sorry, it's an I-centered statement. I'm expressing a sense of regret, sorrow for something that has happened. But when I ask Byron for forgiveness, it takes exceptional humility because I'm surrendering my power to him and putting him in the driver's seat, where I'm sort of really saying it's an act of vulnerability.
Saying you're sorry is a broadcast, it's a statement, and you can be very sincere, but it requires no response from the other. If you ask for forgiveness, you're putting yourself into a complete place of vulnerability, where effectively the other person can withhold it, and you have no guarantees it's going to be given. And so it's much more powerful. So they come together. I'm sorry, but without the will you forgive me, or can you forgive me? And that response deserves an appropriate response, because in the moment, the answer might be, I'm not ready to. And that's quite legitimate. But the question is, are you prepared to? Right? And quite often we've had the conversation with each other where, you know, Francine said to me, not yet, but I will. Right? In other words, she wasn't quite at that moment ready, but she knew she would process her way to it. And that's important. But the issue of mercy is that it takes the steps of both acknowledging what we've done, the sorry, but then asking for forgiveness. And it models itself off reconciliation in the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
I think the thing to say about this is that, you know, marriage is at one level impossible. It's humanly impossible to fulfill the vows we made on our marriage day perfectly. But the wonderful thing about what God calls us to into marriage is it's basically an extravagant demand and it's infinite mercy. That's what God offers us. I mean, God calls
high expectations.
High expectations,
in terms of our moral life and so on.
And that's what God asks us in loving Him. He asks us to live our life, you know, and
completely for Him.
Completely for Him. That's an extravagant demand, but it comes with infinite mercy, and so therefore it's possible to work that forward. And our marriage needs to be the same. We have extravagant expectations and demands of each other, and I mean in the nicest possible way, demands. Like we want to love each other. That's what the marriage vows were. They were extravagant demands. But we also have to have infinite mercy for each other, right? And some of the hardest things to do into marriage is to actually forgive when we're feeling hurt. And so, you know, there's a real generosity in forgiveness, genuine forgiveness, not just gritted, you know, yeah, okay, I forgive you, but rather that, and so it takes two, you know, it takes the other person needs to be in that space where they are asking for it, but we also need to grant it.
If I could just share a little bit about our personal journey on this, is that we, very early in our marriage, recognised the importance of forgiveness. We had really good role modelling from our parents on that, who were both involved in marriage education. But we made the mistake of we jump the first 3 steps and go straight to the please forgive me. And knowing that we wanted to forgive, we wanted to restore relationship, we'd go to the forgiveness and the restoration of the relationship. But because we hadn't been through the first 3 steps, where we were establishing the empathy and making a promise to change, we kept having the same hurts and the same arguments and the same issues kept recurring. We didn't actually progress. So the 4 steps are actually really quite important if you want to kind of do the reset. You can obviously offer mercy and you know, enter back into trust in the relationship like we did without it.
Yeah, you can
but
do
we
that.
don't actually recommend it. We don't think that that is the optimum way to go forward. That's
because
suboptimal.
It's sort of you're building on sand without foundations. The foundation for the change comes from the process that got you to the point. So you know, take the time to go through the steps on the way through. So the repair is important though, because you need it. And I often say that, you know, these sorts of processes are like a first aid kit strapped to your side. You know, when you're out, you know, hiking, that's not relevant to yourselves at the moment, I guess, but hiking in the Australian bush, etc., you're going to come across a deadly snake, you're going to come across all sorts of things. Having a first aid kit.
They don't know what a deadly snake is.
Yeah, I know, you're lucky. It's one of the great things I loved about living in London. Nothing could kill me, except people on the streets. But having a first aid kit where you could self-repair when you know you had an injury. Well, that's what these things are like. So you will have them. You will hurt each other. We'll do it at all levels. The more we're aware of it, the more we realise we're doing it, the faster we repair, the less time we spend down in the dumps with each other, and the more time we spend at the top, you know, in a stronger relational point, and the whole thing becomes a virtuous circle.
Now, we're noticing there's quite a few questions that have come in. So we might just, Laura, do you want to tell us which ones we should focus on first?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just come to you guys. So we have a question from Anonymous. If one cannot forgive immediately, does the other keep asking, or how would you proceed?
So how do we go there?
It depends how you need to respond in a way they don't need to, I think. If you leave the other person having to keep going back saying, will you forgive me, will you forgive me, to ask for forgiveness is incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, but it's got to be a genuine forgiveness. As I said, like when we were younger and we would kind of rush into the forgiveness, in some ways it was easier to ask for forgiveness because we hadn't done the other steps, because there wasn't that sense of ownership. We weren't connecting with the pain we'd caused the other. We weren't making any promise to change. So it was kind of easy to say, oh, will you forgive me, and get it all done and dusted, because we knew that's what we needed to do. So coming back and saying, will you forgive me, is not really a mature response. If the other feels really blocked in forgiveness, well, then maybe we need to step back and go through those steps again more carefully. Have we really felt the sorrow? Have we really understood the pain we've caused and validated their experience by expressing it? Have we really, what was the third step? Have we been sincere in the promise, and you know, have intent to follow through on that? And then I think if those things are there, well, then we can approach that forgiveness question again.
So in all the times when I said, when Francine said, I said, will you forgive me? And she said, well, not now, but I will. I don't ever remember her coming back and saying, oh, by the way, I forgave you today. What I knew was that her intention was that she would be able to be moved to a place of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have to keep going back and checking. So how we respond, I mean, this is why marriage is such a two-way journey. You know, when our spouse is trying to make a repair attempt and it's not really being, you know, they're doing it clumsily, they're not doing it perfectly, we're still angry with them, etc., we still can choose how to respond at that moment. And if we put the bar too high, even if we feel like it, we can make it impossible for them to get over it. And, you know, sometimes we just need a small step, you know, step by step together. So I don't quite, you know, again, it's circumstance specific, but I think the trick is to, you know, be generous to each other by asking forgiveness, but be generous in granting forgiveness or indicating your willingness to enter into that. That gentleness between us is like, it melts us. When we see the other being gentle and vulnerable, it melts us. And that vulnerability can be both in the sense that I'm struggling to forgive, but I want to. And I think I can, but just give me a bit of time. That's an adequate response, I think.
I'm just looking here at this comment from Peter on saying sorry. Michelle and I have different emotional speeds. I flare and recover quickly, and she flares slowly. Pacing is really important. I love the point about not yet, but I will. Yeah, I love the language on that. That's sort of the pace and the flare and stuff.
Guys are particularly good at clearing it. I mean, we go bang, and we sort of, you watch two men, they'll have an argument with each other, and then they sort of, you know, butt heads. They literally walk out and they're best buddies again. The women are looking like, what is wrong with you guys? I mean, you know, it's so and then not every man's the same either, right? So we're all different beasts. So this is to know each other. Yeah. When you know your wife that way, then you actually need to respond to that need and that dimension of her.
We got any other questions there? Building on sand links. Laura, have you got any others for us? Oops, I can't hear you, Laura. You're muted. There we go.
Sorry about that.
Right.
There are no other questions, Byron and Fran, but we've just got lots of people saying that, yeah, they're just really appreciate what you're saying. It's interesting regarding a lot of people want to implement the strongest emotion of the day as a ritual in their own marriage, which is wonderful. So thank you for that wonderful tip. So guys, we have 3 more minutes of the online.
So for those of you who are going to try that, give yourselves 3 weeks, give yourselves 20 days, and then let us know how you go. Send us an email, let us know how you go. It takes a little bit to build a habit, and just not, you know, it was great, or, you know, it was okay, but not quite us, or whatever, but also tell us how you did it, because we didn't invent that, you know, strongest emotion every day. The couples we work with revealed that to us through the conversations we have. So this stuff is really important to get the feedback on. The other thing I'd say is that great line of, I think it's quoted from Winston Churchill. I think it's a slight misquote, but never, ever, ever give up. I mean, I think that's such an important thing on marriage, is that, you know, we married in the Christian faith and the Catholic tradition. We worship a God who died for us. You know, our life as a married couple is basically, if you listen to the vows, it's a gift of self-sacrifice, of mutual self-donation to each other, and that self-donation is often with pain, with cost, and that grows us as a person, and that's the model of unconditional love that God witnessed to us by dying for us. So I think we should, we should never, ever give up, and know we're playing for keeps here. And so we really, encourage you to, when in good times, keep investing, prepare, and in bad times, don't give up and just find the repair. And you don't necessarily repair, like we go to a doctor with an illness or an injury. You don't walk out cured. We walk out with exercises or a change in prescriptions or a change in lifestyle, which is painful, but we then work with it. And so don't be too unrealistic on your expectations about how quickly sometimes we can repair, but know there's always hope.
Now, it's just a couple of last things for you. Bella, will you just put the slide live for us, please? So there is a handout on the Way of Mercy. It just looks like that. It'll be in the link that we sent through to you. Also, hang on, I'll just come over here. We've done that, some Q&A. Resources, if you're looking for more things, there's online courses and coaching sessions available at smartloving.org. There's also live courses that the team in the UK are running live courses all the time, and you should be able to find information there as well. There's also the blog, and we've got a page there under the blog that's called SOS. So if you just go to the menu blog and look at the menu underneath it, you'll see SOS. We keep that updated regularly with links and resources and articles and things that are helpful for couples or spouses who are in really difficult situations. And finally, we have on sale for the month of September for 50% off is the Breakthrough Online course. It takes roughly 3 hours. It's for spouses in difficult marriages. So it's
like ours.
it's individual. Of course, there's no couple activities. There's lots of individual reflections and things to do, but it was designed in mind for spouses whose spouse was unwilling or unable to participate with them and who are sort of finding the marriage difficult. It roughly takes about 3 hours or so, and we really commend that to you.
So thank you very much for being with us this morning. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope the rest of your day goes well, and we really thank you and encourage you and affirm you for taking the time out to spend an hour like this investing in your marriage. Good luck with all the work ahead. Yes. Take care over there in the UK.
Yeah, and if you're joining us for the leaders session, we're going to take a half-hour break, and then we'll adjourn again on a new link. So for those of you who are joining us for there, we'll catch up with you then. And for those who are leaving us now, thank you so very much. This has been recorded, and we will find a way to share it with you and post it so that if your spouse was unable to join you on it, you can share it with them at a later time.
Goodbye. God bless.
Okay, God bless
you.
Well, thank you so much, Byron and Fran. And on behalf of all the attendees today, we've had some feedback everybody's saying thank you so much. It's been a life-changing workshop. Thank you everyone for joining us online. We really appreciate you taking the time to invest in your own marriage. Just a reminder to fill out the feedback survey that has been emailed to you. We would greatly appreciate your feedback about today's workshop. This has been a SmartLoving online workshop in faith and in love. Goodbye.